Hi, I'm Thomas Accardo, Product Manager at Industrial Defender. I'd like to demonstrate a few things about the policy feature of the Industrial Defender Central Manager. In this solution's terminology, a policy is an expression or a collection of expressions which are measured against actual configuration data collected from assets. It's similar to a baseline where we compare all the collected configuration data for an asset to its baseline, but in the case of a policy, you usually only consider a focused set of things at a time. Also, in a policy, you aren't evaluating to detect change, but rather to assert some condition. In other words, while baselines make comparisons like, does this measured item equal what's in the baseline? Policies ask questions like, is the required password length at least 8 characters? Or is McAfee antivirus installed? Or is the guest account disabled? So let's take a look at a simple policy for a Microsoft Windows asset. So first we'll take a look at collected data for the asset just so we can get a feel for what we're going to do here. And you can see, we'll look at the asset details for this asset and see a lot of things related to logging. But down here, kind of in the middle towards the bottom, we see some other things that are probably good candidates for policy. So here we see the maximum password age, which is set to 42 on this host. That's the setting where if a user's password hasn't been changed in 42 days, then the system will ask them to change it the next time they log in. Another one you see here is audit logon events. Has a value of 3 on this system. Audit logon events is what controls whether or not authentication attempts are logged on that host. So it's actually this value is a representation of a couple of binary indicators, and 3, I'll just tell you, means log both successful and failed logins, which is usually what you want if you're monitoring assets for security or compliance. And we can also policies don't have to be against the asset details. It can be against any of these items. So for example, if we look at patches and maybe look at the different types of patches on here, I can see that there's a security update from January of 2025. This is KB 5050388. So let's just say in our sample policy that we want this to be true. We want all of our Windows assets to have that particular patch on it, right? So let's take a look at a policy where I already have one that has this stuff. It's made of these 3 things. This is our sample Windows policy here. It has 2 expressions under asset details. We say that audit logon events, that value should be equal to 3, the integer value 3. And for the password age, we're going to assert that it should be at least 30. It could be 42, that's fine. But if it's less than 30, that would be non-conforming. So we'll make those 2 assertions there. And then under patches, we'll just say that patch ID KB 5050388 has to exist, needs to be here on this host. So that's our policy. Now, the last thing you have to do with the policy is you have to indicate, which host it's associated with, right? So in this case, our sample Windows policy, we are going to make sure that that is associated with our asset group, all Windows. We conveniently have one just for that purpose. So once we have a policy defined, we've indicated what the policy is, what values it's measuring conformance against. It's associated with some assets. We can go ahead and execute that policy. Say yes, and this will happen right away. So as you might guess, green is indicating conformance and red is indicating non-conformance. And so we'll see if we kind of sort this by our configuration attribute, the thing that we were measuring against. We can see that with our audit logon events, half of the hosts were just fine. The other half had something different. So audit logon events on this host was set to 0, which is not what we would want in this case. Everybody's maximum password age was within policy, so no issues there. But then as we look down here, we can see that half of the hosts had the patch we wanted them to have, and the other half did not. So that's what a policy is all about. You make a group of usually kind of similar things, and you put that in one policy, and then you execute it against a group of hosts. I'll point out that making policies can be kind of tedious, especially if you aren't versed in all the specific names of settings for, all, and on all the different operating systems. So, for example, if you didn't know what audit logon events, what the name of that setting was, or what the value 3 meant, as opposed to 1 or 2 or 0, then you'd have a little research to do. But that's okay. We have some libraries of policies already baked into the system for just this purpose. So you can import these. Um, you can see we have some for NERC SIP. We have one for NIST, and these are just already built-in policies that you can pick and choose which ones you want. You don't have to take the whole thing. You can, or you can just, grab individual items from there. Uh, you might still need to review some of these. In fact, you'll probably definitely need to review most of those policies just to make sure the specific data values for comparison are what would be appropriate for your environment. They're not all necessarily 30 days. It could be, whatever you define it to be. But it's a good start, and it helps you get going on those. And then one last point I'll say is it's very common. I'll just point out it's very common in OT environments for there to be different logical OT systems, kind of managed together in one place, managed by different groups. They're usually different vendors, or oftentimes different vendors, and with different operating systems and even different ages of the systems, and it could even be maintained at different levels of you know, different levels of maintenance there. So it just makes for very heterogeneous environments, and that presents all sorts of challenges. A lot of times, especially things like these security policies, like password lengths and things like that, people tend to think of Windows Active Directory as being the way to manage that, and it is, but it doesn't help in those systems where it's not used. And Active Directory also doesn't take into account your Cisco or FortiGate network gear, or your Red Hat Linux servers, your GPS clocks, or all those other types of devices out there. But policies on the Industrial Defender Central Manager give you a way to cut across all of those boundaries with a more abstract approach to measure conformance of the entire environment all on a single pane of glass.